Hi, and welcome to Chapter 1 of Global Business. This is a really important chapter because it's going to set the tone for the rest of the textbook, the rest of the class. And what it does is it gives you a nice platform, paradigm for what this global business thing is about. First, what you'll see is that we're going to basically split everything in two parts. Every chapter there's going to be a theme that's going to be split in two parts, and those parts are going to be that half of what makes a company successful with international business, one tenet, one half will be just the external environment, the institutions, the policies, the laws, etc. of those countries, and the other half are going to be more of the core competencies of the company itself. What it does better than others, how it's positioned, its differentiation. And so you'll see that as a theme throughout. So that's the first thing I want to let you know. The rest of it is going to be just a really nice way for us to just have a discussion about what this global business thing is about, why it's super important, why it's really great that you're taking this class, because you will benefit from it as a business major and even as a human being, just having a better grasp as to how things work around the world and trade and how we get things and why we get things and how policy affects things. So I'm excited. This is a class that I created when I started at Chaffey College in early 2000. I also created the degree, the associate's degree, and the certificate. Obviously, this is something I'm very passionate about, and I really hope, my goal is that I'm able to invoke that and maybe even get you to be excited about it, I hope. All right, so let's just get moving. What we'll do first is we'll look at the content of this first chapter. So first we'll look at the concept of international business and global business. When I took this class over 25 years ago, there was really not a lot of dialogue about global business. It was always kind of this international, bilateral type business, meaning that you talked about doing business with another country or maybe two, but really the whole concept of global business was not something that was predominant then. Now, of course, it is. So we'll talk about how that works and why it is. 3 reasons why it's important to study global business. Again, I don't think I need to make a case for it. I think the author probably the same, but a lot of students would think of this class as an elective. As a business major, especially when you transfer, you're going to be exposed to international dimension in just about every class you take. I think it will give you such edge to have a real grasp, and I guarantee you will learn a lot in this class about things that perhaps you didn't know about, or even worse, you thought you understood, but you realize not so much. We'll look at the fundamental question that the study of global business seeks to answer and the 2 perspectives from which to answer it. So I kind of touched on that already in a previous slide. The 3 ways of understanding what globalization is. And this is really, again, this is the paradigm. Depending as to who you talk to, you'll see some people maybe have a strong opinion about global business or about globalization one way. Other people have a completely opposite opinion another way, and then the more pragmatic kind of view of it, which we'll talk about all 3. The size of the global economy and the strength of multinationals. So whenever I refer to MNCs, it's an acronym we'll be using for this class to discuss multinational corporations. Again, it's just, especially now, I'm really excited that I'm recording this lecture now, because there's just a new record that has been broken by a company that I'll discuss. And of course, we'll look, as we finish this chapter, this introduction chapter, we'll look at how the book is organized, and it's really done in a great way so that we're going to just kind of build upon different sections. It's going to be split in 3 different sections, so we'll talk about that at the end. Moving along, let's just get going. So the question is, so first I want to tell you this. If you haven't read the book, if you haven't read the chapter, please stop the video now and please familiarize yourself with the chapter. this is not going to work as well for you if you try to grasp the stuff that I'm discussing without first having tried to read it. I'm not saying you have to hang on to every single word in the book, but at least skim over it, look at the definitions. Importantly, I would really like you to read the opening case. In every chapter, there's going to be an opening case, and it'll be really critical for us to have that as a point of discussion, because it just really, the author did a fantastic job choosing these cases that engage the varied aspects of each chapter. It's a really interesting one. So the first question here with Disney going to Shanghai, the first question that I have for you after you've read it is why. Think about why. Why did Disney go to Shanghai? Why does Disney care? We have Disney Orlando, we have Disney Anaheim, there's a Euro Disney. Do we really care? Did Disney really is it that big a deal? Is it a distraction? Why is it important? And I'll answer that question with a couple of numbers. So first, the U.S. population. As of now, the U.S. population is about 330 million people. So just think about that, right? Everybody in the U.S., 50 states, we are about 330 million of us. That's a lot of people, right? Let me ask you this. Can you imagine what would it be like if all of these people were within just driving distance of Anaheim Disney? First of all, the 4 or 5 would be murder, but it would be insane for Disney, right? I mean, can you imagine? But instead, if someone from Hawaii, Alaska, or New York wants to come here, they have to fly. It's a big deal. They have to spend a lot of money on transportation. Well, this number alone should kind of give you a little bit of a reason as to why. More than 330 million people live within a 3-hour drive or train ride from Shanghai Disneyland. That is just mind-blowing. I don't even think we need to talk about anything else right now as to the why. Let alone there's about 1.4 billion people who live in China. So if you think about that 330 million, you can put a zero in front of it in billion. That's 0.3 billion, which by the way is less than the 0.4 billion in a 1.4 billion Chinese population. And it's the 0.3 of India's population. India has 1.3 billion people. So, having said that, this is a great opener. There's 7 billion people who live on this planet. Only 3,300 million of them are American, 1.4 in China, 1.3 in India. By the way, both countries in Asia. And so about a third of the entire world lives in Asia. You can't ignore that. Or if you do, it'll be your fault when your competitor takes over. So that's, by the way, page that's on page 3. So I hope you're following along. And again, please don't even bother with this presentation if you haven't read the chapter. You will be doing so much better in this class when you read the chapters ahead. And it's a great book. The author did a great job writing this book in a way that I believe really flows. It's almost like a magazine. All right, moving along. This is what I want you to consider as you have read this. Question is, what is the role of politics in business? When you read that opener and all the things that Bob Iger had to do for this to work, the current and former CEOs of Disney, over a decade, more than a decade, so many presidents, premiers in China. What was the role of politics in business, both with China and the US, for this to happen? The role of ethics. The question here is, did Disney have to compromise for this to happen? Were there some maybe unsavory ethical compromises that maybe Disney wishes it hadn't done? But again, cost benefit. consider the long-term planning, how long this took, and what long-term planning means. In my management class, we learned that for American companies, most of the American companies, long-term planning is 6 years, right? This went way beyond that. So consider that. And of course, flexibility and adaptability to change. You have a plan, you have an agreement, you think you're moving forward, and everything just, goes to hell. So how have you designed your plan, and have you designed your plan to be flexible and adaptable to change? Again, it's a topic we talk about a lot in management. For those of you who've taken it with me, or for those of you who plan on taking it, you will see that, of course, it's impossible not to talk about management when you talk about business management, right, in a national role. And of course, measure success. So the case does a great job with the author in the end questioning whether or not this was a success for Disney. I encourage you, after you've read the case, the copyright on this particular case is 2011, which is not fantastic, but this was a source from Bloomberg. I encourage you to see what's happened since then with Shanghai Disney. All right, let's go on now to the beginning of the chapter, having moved past the ethical dilemma here. We'll look at the definition of international business. So very straightforward. This is what I call a flashcard moment. Make sure you get this definition out of the way. An international business is a business that engages in international economic activities. Boom. Notice it says economic activities. It doesn't just say export. It doesn't say it has to have a division there. It doesn't say there's a strategic alliance or a joint venture. We'll talk about all those things. It's kind of broad, right? International economic activities. It's the action of doing business abroad, right? Then we get into MNEs. So earlier I said MNCs, right? So you'll hear these two terms. They basically are the same. MNCs, multinational corporations. Here your author is kind of broadening the term. They don't have to be corporations. Again, maybe they're set up as LLCs. So we'll call them multinational enterprises, firms engaging in foreign direct investment and operating in multiple countries. So again, these are just basic terms we're learning, very first chapter, but you have within a definition, you have another term that pops up, foreign direct investment. So let's look at that. Investment in controlling and managing value-added activities and other countries. If I just read it to you like that, it sounds kind of boring, and it's kind of an inert term that I got to remember it just because he said so. No, it's super exciting. Let me explain. When you think about things you love, my kids, I have 2 sons, and the best thing I've ever done for them is subscribing to Spotify, because they cannot live without Spotify. I think it's their #1 app. And so having said that, it's interesting because everybody uses Spotify, but very few people understand that or know or realize that Spotify is not an American company, right? It is a Swedish multinational company. So that's interesting. There's a Swedish company with way more users and sales outside of Sweden than in Sweden. So that's just a start, right? But then let's just go beyond that. When you have, let's just say, let's use Ford Motor Company. When Ford Motor Company decides to make cars in England or Slovakia or in South Africa, actually making cars there, they build a factory there, they hire local people. There's some components of the car that do come from the US, very few. Most of them will come from Mexico, from Eastern Bloc countries like Slovakia, Slovenia, etc. All that stuff is going, but a lot's coming from Asia to this plant, right, in Johannesburg in South Africa. That would be an example of a foreign direct investment, right? When a Chinese investment bank buys 25-30% of an American investment firm, that's another example of FDI. They don't control the firm. Blackstone Group, for example, is a huge investment firm And that firm, a big chunk of it, I would say about a quarter of it, is owned by a Chinese bank. That's an example of FDI, right? When you think about presidents or governors flying overseas and staying in a couple months somewhere in India or Brazil or whatever, and you might be wondering, like, why are they over there instead of over here? They should be helping us. Well, they are. What they're trying to do is they usually bring a bunch of American executives with them, and they're trying to cut deals so that the foreign venture companies are interested in opening up factories in the U.S., which means more jobs for Americans. They pay taxes here, blah, blah, blah. So again, I hope I made it I shed some light on it. There's going to be a whole chapter. We'll discuss way more of it. It's fascinating, and it helps the United States. Okay, emerging markets. Now it's going to get really interesting. So when you look at the global economy, yes, we always talk about the big developed economies, right? In this case, of course, the US, China, Japan, Western Europe, right? But what the real interesting story in terms of global growth economically is the emerging economies, right? And so these are countries that once upon a time were LDCs, we call them, less developed countries or less developed economies, and they were really just not doing very well. But little by little, their growth went through the roof. And so you're not just calculating their net economy as a GDP, but you're also looking at their GDP growth and the GDP. And so they make about half of the global economy. So you can't ignore them. You want to be part of the growth. That's, by the way, half the growth. We use something called the gross domestic product. Those of you who took econ, you already know it. If those of you who haven't, don't worry, it's okay. We'll make it easy for you, I promise. But there is going to be a chapter on international econ. I will use normal words and normal examples. And so the GDP adjusted for PPP, let me explain what that means. When you look at Mexico, right? So Mexico uses the peso, the US uses the dollar, obviously different currencies. But it's even more interesting than that. The cost of living is different, right? Purchasing power of people is different. So if I were to try to compare really the economy, it's like trying to compare an apple to an orange. It doesn't work. So what I have to do is I have to bring parity. I have to try to get this apple and this orange and use different little instruments to try to put them on the same level so that I can actually compare an apple to an apple. The dollar usually plays a role. Later on, we'll talk about the Big Mac. The Economist magazine came up with a fun little thing called the Big Mac Index, where they're able to kind of neutralize differences between currencies so that you can see what the real cost of a Big Mac around the world is in dollars. So that's an example of PPP, purchasing power parity. Well, there it is. Conversion determining the equivalent amount of goods and services different currencies can purchase. So I've explained it. Now, at the very bottom here, by the way, when you see these hyperlinks, it's because they're the hyperlink to the slide that I will show you next. I will make these PowerPoint slides available to you. You can print them, you can save them. If you want to see one of the hyperlinks that I share, just click here and you'll be able to do it. I try to embed them in my presentation to try to make things a little bit more seamless, a little bit more accessible. So here what we have now is we have real GDP growth in the world as data from the International Monetary Fund. So when you look at that, what you can see here is you can see the in this case the legend shows you in terms of growth who's growing and who's not. What's happening around the world. So 6% growth is GDP growth, and of course less than 3%. Of course, most of the world right now, we're in the middle of the pandemic. We have negative growth. So we're at 6% negative in the US. Brazil's at 5.3, Argentina at 5.7, Chile 4.5, Canada 6.2. You get the idea. But Russia's 5.5. Some other places, look at Ethiopia. Ethiopia's 3.2 growth, which is insane. But Ethiopia is doing amazingly well. They have a new president who won the Nobel Prize. He was the first time someone from his political party was elected. He has done a lot of interesting things. As you know, probably from high school geography, the River Nile, it actually ends in Egypt, but one of the origins of the Nile is in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is currently damming the Nile, and it's going to use it for economic resources, energy production, etc., etc. So there's just really a lot of stuff going on there. FYI, this is Global Business. So yes, I'll be introducing countries to you with their presidents, their economies, what they've done, good, bad, neutral, throughout the class, right? And so I hope you're interested in this, because if you're not, that's a problem, right? And by the way, we are interdependent, just so you know. That big map, a lot of people think, maybe, why do we care? I don't care. I don't need to know. We're going to find out by the time the class is over. We care. It matters because we are all economically interdependent on each other, whether we like it or not. So anyway, this is what I wanted to show you. You can mess with the stuff from the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and I'll talk about that group as well in the class later on. But you can mess with this. You can select different indicators, etc., and just kind of I call this fun for the whole family. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So again, the emerging markets, the great transformation of the global economy, embodied by the shift in economic weights and engines of growth toward emerging economies such as BRICS. BRICS is maybe some of you have heard of it before. It's a very famous acronym. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Once upon a time, those countries were on fire. That's why they were called BRICS, because they just started growing like crazy. But something happened since then. Not all of them are really growing as fast as they were. In fact, some of them are really doing poorly, even before the pandemic, by the way. When you look at Chinese economic growth and ask yourself, think about that. What is fueling the growth in China? What is it? Is it a natural resource? Are they like just drilling oil like crazy and selling it, and that's how they're making money? No. It's value added. And a lot of people think, well, China makes just, cheap stuff, right? They make a pen. They'll make a little, eyewear cleaner thing. Your shirts. But it's interesting, the things we forget. They make things you love, like your phones, your computers, really complex instruments that many people cannot live without. They also make that. And so it's the biggest exporter on the planet, which is, of course, how it added value. And then let's look at a country like Russia. Can you guess where half of the Russian economy comes from? Where does Russia get half of its economic resource for everything? It's oil. It's oil and natural gas. And as you know right now, when you fill up, gas is pretty cheap compared to what it was once upon a time. And so if gas is cheap, that's less revenue for Russia. If your big trick is to drill a hole in the ground and sell the stuff, and that's all you got, or that's a big chunk of what you got, and sales go down, that's a problem. So you will see here that, and we'll talk a little bit more about this down the line, that things are not as great as what they used to seem when we first coined BRICS. BRICS are important because that is 40% of the world's population. If you go back to the first slide, I just told you already about India, China, so that's a no-brainer. Between the two, you got 2.5 billion people out of 7 billion on planet Earth. Well, there you go, right there. Brazil, Russia, South Africa, not so much on the population. BRICS are 1/4 of the world's land area and 1/4 of the global GDP at PPP. So remember earlier we said that the emerging economies account for half of global GDP at PPP, and half of that comes from just these 5 countries, the BRICS. So you don't want to ignore that. This is what I did. I created this little slide based on a slide that I had previously. So if you look at the top table here, and you look at population 2016, and you look at the GDP on the right, I thought it'd be kind of cool for you guys to see what the table looks like today August 2020 when I made my update. Brazil went from 200 to 209 million. Congratulations. Russia 144 to 146. Okay. India 1.02 to 1.3. Just think about that for a second. That's more than the growth of Brazil or Russia. I mean, that's more than the entire population, right, of Brazil or Russia, right there. So just the growth alone exceeds the entire population of either of those countries. That is mind-boggling. And of course, China went from 1.36 to 1.4. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the fastest growing country in terms of population is India. In fact, by about 2025, India's population will be greater than that of China because of course, the infamous one-child policy that China had. Now you have a population dying off, and you have that growth of the one-child policy. And so what's happening is you're going to actually see a decline in the population of China, juxtaposed with the continuous growth of the Indian population. Having said all that, look at the map. Look at the map. And look at the red, right? So the red is China, right? I guess that's not a very good map because you got China mixed with, Russia, parts of Russia. So that's not great as a map. But when you look at India, how tiny India is, I mean, that's just alarming, that many people living there. And then, of course, South Africa barely nudged from 0.35 trillion to 0.36 trillion. That's the lowest growth. From 53 million to 58 million. Now let's look at GDP. What I did here is, of course, I showed you in red the decrease in the economy and green the increase in the economy. Brazil's economy tanked from 2.3 trillion to 1.8. I included the three very famous covers of The Economist magazine here. In 2009, Brazil takes off, booming economy. Ignacio Lula da Silva was the president. He seemed like a really progressive, interesting guy. Everything was booming. Bam. 2013, game over. Dilma Rousseff comes in. She's a bit of a technocrat, and we find out between her and Lula, bad things. Both of them were sent to jail for corruption. Anyway, there's actually a series on Netflix about that right now. Not very good. Interest rates through the roof, all kinds of things. We'll talk more about that as we go. But China, look at China, from 9.2 to 14 trillion. Clearly, China is you cannot ignore the success story that is China. And there's a lot of media, there's a lot of stuff, the politics and the whatever, fine. Question, you want to fight the change, you want to be part of the change, right? So a lot of the multinationals, that's what they're doing. That's the opening case in point with Disney going to Shanghai, right? How can I benefit from the growth? Let's just be part of the growth. That's the discussion. All right, let's move along. This is fascinating to me, right? This is fascinating. If I just kind of ask you this question, I did this deliberately. Don't worry, your computer's fine. 7 billion people on planet Earth, right? I want you to try to figure out how many people, if we were to break down the entire thing in 3 parts, right? 3 parts. And we break it down by parts of income per capita GDP per year. Try to figure out of 7 billion people, how many people would live on less than $2,000 a year? And then how many people live between $2,000 to $20,000 a year? And how many people live with more than $20,000 a year per year? So if you were to break down these in 3, they don't have to be equal, by the way, out of 7 billion, what are you thinking? So let's find out. Less than $2,000 per year, 5 out of 7 billion people. Yes, you probably already know this, but most of the world lives in abject poverty. 5 out of 7 billion. 1 billion between 2 and 20. So you're seeing the developing economies kind of in that group, right? And only 1 billion over $20,000 a year, which, by the way, if you live in California, $20K a year is nothing. Once you're done paying your rent car insurance, food, diapers, you got nothing. So the cost of living is pretty high. 20K doesn't seem like a lot. Only 1 billion people on planet Earth make that much. Food for thought. So why study global business? Question number one, advance your employability and career in the global economy. You've all heard about LinkedIn. You all heard about LinkedIn by now. I strongly urge you, plead to you to create an account. They're free. Don't wait until your senior year in college to figure out how you're going to make connections and get hired. It's now, people, now. And I know some of you are thinking, I don't have anything to put up there. Put something, anything. And you need to start making recommendations. Why LinkedIn? Well, how about this? Remember that little trivia I gave you about 330 million people on planet Earth? There are now more than 330 million people using LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a global phenomenon. And so what I'm telling you is this: if you speak a second language and you have a degree, you're not just in the market for a job in the US. If you played your cards right, you're in the market for a job anywhere in the world. And so, food for thought. Make sure you expand your horizon. Number two, better prepare for possible expat assignment. Kind of piggybacks into what I just said. I always like to say, so you know stuff. You don't want to be at a job interview and answering questions showing you have very little understanding of how things work on this planet. And number three, build stronger competency interacting with foreign suppliers, partners, competitors, and in working with foreign-owned employers in your own country. It's just smart, people. So here I had to put the hyperlink because for whatever reason I wasn't able to embed this one. It just wasn't acting as well as I was hoping it would be. But I'm taking you to the Chaffey College website over here. And so this is for Chaffey College business website, right? And so if you go here, you'll see business, technology, hospitality. There's one of our awesome professors over here teaching accounting. And if you click over here, explore certificates, you'll get a new page. Now, for those of you who are still deciding, I'm not sure exactly what I want to do, this is great for you. I think most of you in this class are already thinking global, so I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to click on global. And here's international business. This is our major. What this does is a little video you can watch that explains a little bit about what international business really is. But what it does, it tells you about what the outcome is, what the salary, growth, etc. Over here, salaries anywhere from $26,000 to $208,000 with the average of $73K. The good news for you is we're the Inland Empire. This is a gateway, a hub for imports coming in from Asia. Lots and lots of demand in this particular area. So anyway, just kind of letting you know that's there. This is the major. You're currently actually taking global, so that would be second term if you did it that way with Business 88 and etc. So anyway, all that to say, you want to make sure that that you are, if that's the major you're thinking about, this is where you would go. International marketing, by the way, Marketing 405, will be taught in spring of next year by a colleague of mine who is awesome. So make sure you sign up for that. It'll be a requirement, and of course accounting if you haven't already taken it. So that's that. Wanted to share that with you. All right, moving along. Now, remember we talked about this on the first slide, that how we're going to split everything in two parts as we try to answer on the red over here, what determines the success and failure of firms around the globe. And the two things that determine that are controllable and less controllable. The less controllable are the institution-based view, the external stuff, formal, informal rules of the game. I'll show you a slide on that. And then for the internal stuff, firm-specific resources and capabilities. There's a term I'll be using throughout the class. Those of you who've taken management with me, you've heard me say this before, and the term is core competency. Core competency. In fact, let me pause here right now, and let me ask you this question. If I go to your company, if I go to your work, and you're not there, and I interview your colleagues and I interview your boss and I ask them this about you. What are they known for? What do people who need help go see them for? What is the one thing they're really great at explaining that people ask them for help? What is that thing? And if you are that person, and it's easy for you to say, oh, everybody comes to me for the operating system or the inventory system or whatever, that's a core competency. That is your core competency. You want to try to collect as many of those as possible. It differentiates you from other employees. Obviously, as a company, you want a world-class core competency that truly sets you apart. And so let's get into it. Institution-based view, the firm performance is determined by institution framework governing firm behavior worldwide. And so in this particular case, you're talking about formal, informal institutions that govern individual and firm behavior. When you go back, I want you to do something. I want you to go back to that opening case and find out what percentage of Disney Shanghai the Disney company had to agree to. Think about that. Was it 60%, 75%? It's your company, it's your division over here in Shanghai. For this to happen, because of the Chinese government, what was the number? Was it majority? Was it more than 50%? Or was it minority? Would Disney ever agree to create a whole theme park and not control it by agreeing to less than 50%? Institutional framework, people, some of the stuff you're going to have to do just to get it done sometimes is just crazy. It deals with the external environment, and so that's for that. The resource-based view. All right. So it focuses on a firm's internal resource and capability. Now, as we go here, we're talking about international business, aren't we? I want you to think about this. So my name, for example, I have a French name. And so sometimes people look at it and go, what is that? I don't know how to pronounce that. Is this, what is this, a man, a woman? I'm a man. Is it, they have no clue, especially if they've never taken French in high school. If you took French in high school, you know it's a French name. No big deal. How many of you have a name like that? How many of you have a name that indicates your country of origin or that of your ancestors, right? And is it always well received? It could be a cultural name. Is it always well received? And so you can understand sometimes with just that example what could be interpreted as liability of foreignness for a company, right? How many times have you heard, well, this is a foreign company. I don't want to buy a product from a foreign company. I want to help my fellow citizen. I want to buy an American product. So I have a picture here of the 2019 Ram Heavy Duty. Look at that bad boy. Well, that is a Mexican truck. It's made by Chrysler, which is interestingly owned by Fiat, which is Italian. So you have a parent company that is Italian, that owns the Chrysler company that makes the Dodge Ram and also a bunch of other stuff like Jeep and stuff. And many of these are made in Mexico, right? Saltillo over here and Toluca. So that Ram over here is an American brand that is made in the Saltillo truck assembly plant along with the Ram 1500. And so I want to first make sure that you guys understand. Is there really, first of all, anything as an American car? Does that even really truly exist? And if it does, maybe it's not what you think. Maybe it's Tesla. Tesla uses a lot of American parts. It doesn't use motors. It uses an electric motor with an electric battery. So if you think about the parts already, it needs a lot less parts. And most of the parts that you get on a car, a combustion engine car, comes from all over the world. Most likely right now, if you have a combustion engine car, not an electric car, most likely, most of you have a German transmission. One of the biggest transmission company on the planet is German. We'll talk about that more later on. So now that I've done that, I wanted to kind of flip that coin for you and make you kind of rethink what an American brand is. And so let's go and look at that liability of foreignness. Inherent disadvantage experienced by foreign firms in host countries because of their non-native status. Well, RAM is native, but many people don't realize it's not really American in terms of parts anymore, or at least country of origin. Firms' resource and capabilities can offset the disadvantage. Let's go there. Let's see what that means. If my slides cooperate. There we go. So this is an example. Now hopefully this video will pop up any second. This is how Toyota every 4 years has to come up with these ads every 4 years like clockwork. So you might wonder, well, what's special? Why every 4 years? Well, this year is one of those 4 years, election cycle. During the election cycle, the candidates, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, will talk about helping America and speak to a base that responds very, very well to American products and American jobs, which, of course, why wouldn't you want? But that's a problem for Toyota, and it's a problem for Honda, and it's a problem for any brand that is not quote-unquote native, that is quote-unquote foreign, right? And so in this particular example, what we have here, with the example of Toyota, we have a company that is non-native, and we have a company here that is trying to appeal to people by saying, whoa, 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 hold on. So let's see how they do it. Let's hope this works. Let's see how they do it.
At Toyota, we assemble cars and trucks right here with American hands. American hands at the design table and on the assembly line. Hard-working hands. Hands that served our country. Hands that volunteer. Hands that coach T-ball. The hands that assemble our vehicles, hold us together. So when we get asked who we are, we proudly raise our hands and say, we are Toyota USA.
Think about that ad, and let me ask you this. What were they selling? What model Toyota, I'm going to black this out for a second. What model Toyota were they selling? Was it the Camry? Were they telling you, is a Toyota-thon going on? No. They spent millions of dollars on those ads just to let you know they're American. And so this is an example of what we've just talked about. This is an example of how Toyota and Honda has won, and they all do. And I read the Economist magazine like clockwork. Every 4 years, there'll be a bunch of stuff in the Economist magazine reminding everyone that, I don't know, the Subaru Outback is made in the US somewhere in the East Coast. And so they have to do that to overcome the liability of foreignness because they're afraid that voters are being misinformed and end up thinking that they're just a foreign brand. All right, so now that we've discussed that, let's continue with the resource-based view. I hope you don't think that I'm not getting some kind of a commission from Toyota over here by mentioning the company. Here's the deal. As long as you're going to be a business major, you will learn about Toyota. That's just how it's going to be. The reason is Toyota has a core competency in continuous improvement and quality that has been unsurpassed in the auto industry and even across industries. There's a book called The Toyota Way. For those of you who are interested in the stuff, quality and how it works and whatever, this book was written by an American consultant, and it kind of exposes how Toyota came up with its principles. In this class, I won't spend too much time talking about quality, reliability, etc. But for those of you who've taken management with me, that is a big chapter, and we do explain how that works and where it came from, etc. And so, having said that, the reason I'm explaining this to you is because Toyota, since right after World War II, when there was a rebirth at Toyota, where we actually, the U.S. sent a couple of American consultants there, and one of them was engaged by Toyota and helped Toyota with quality, continuous improvement, stuff like that. His name was Dr. Deming. The other one was Dr. Duran. And what happened is they turned Toyota into what it is today because they listened. The CEO of Toyota, Mr. Toyota with a D, just did everything he said and still doing it today. Does it mean they're perfect? No company's perfect. Fine, we got that. Having said that, the best-selling car, not in the United States, but the best-selling car in the world is the Corolla. Number one, 7 billion people on this planet, it's Corolla. It's not a mystery that the company was able to do that in terms of reliability, in terms of development, in terms of research and development, manufacturing, etc. What it has value in how it operates, and it's differentiated itself from other companies. So I hope that gives you an idea as to core competency. Let's all agree, nobody that I've ever met is buying a Corolla or a Camry because they look cool, right? Let's just agree right there. It's like saying, I love vanilla. All right, enough of that. Let's see, what are the advantages of globalization? Greater economic growth and higher standard of living. How does that work? Well, again, think about the stuff you love, right? I'll have an assignment for you in this class later on about what would it cost if Apple decided to make an iPhone in the United States, right? And it's fascinating. It's going to be even worse than you might imagine. And so what does that mean? Greater economic growth and higher standard of living. What about the idea of can't we just make everything here? I can tell you what that would look like. If we try to make everything here, there's a country that does that actually. There's a country that's decided, I'm going to be entirely independent. I don't need anybody. I don't want to buy your stuff. I'm going to make everything here. And if you haven't guessed it, of course that country is North Korea. Not a joke. That's what North Korea has done. And so there is if there's any lack of understanding about the advantage of globalization, all you have to do is this. You take one country, let's call it Korea, and then you decide you're going to do a little experiment. And you're going to cut it in half. And you're going to say on the north side, we're going to do this completely one way, and it's going to be 100% absolute sovereignty. I don't need anybody's help. I don't need you. I'm going to shut myself up from the world, and I'm just going to do it my way because I'm just better. And the other one, the south side, decides, I think we just got to work with people. Can we get some ideas from here? South Korea, in case you haven't figured it out, is located right across Japan. And so the revolution of the South Korean auto industry, Kia, Hyundai, all that is tied to the Japanese auto industry, where Korea benefited from the Japanese know-how in quality, and in fact sometimes was accused, Korean companies were accused of stealing engineers from Japan. Well, one of them is a third world country, and the other one is a thriving trillion-dollar economy. Not that long ago, they were the same place. So again, there's a great case in point for globalization, and it's almost like splitting twins at birth, right? We're going to call one twin North Korea and the other one South Korea. And unfortunately, I feel really bad for the North Korean twin. All right, there's an increase in technology sharing. It's fascinating. We don't even think about this. I mean, because I'm old, I'll share this with you. I still remember the first phones I ever saw that had the capability of taking pictures were not American phones. They were Taiwanese students who were taking my class. I taught at Cal State Fullerton back 100 years ago. And I remember this one student coming back one day and showing me a brand new phone that his dad got him in Taiwan. And our phones still weren't even doing that. And so we do have an interesting technology sharing. We still do it today, right? And we benefit from each other. Remember, what makes this country amazing is competition, right? The question is, isn't it even better to have global competition so that nobody gets, too lazy with their product and actually tries to improve amazing stuff? Extensive cultural integration. This is where it gets a little bit dicey sometimes. The United States gets accused of exporting its culture. And that's true, by the way. And there's one word for that. And that word is Hollywood, right? If you think about the Hollywood productions and how much American culture gets exported throughout the world through film, yes, there's huge cultural integration there and exportation. There's Americanization throughout the world, and reversely, some other ways coming back here. What are the disadvantages? Well, undermines wages in rich countries. Let's talk about that. I want you to imagine that you're born in London and you grow up and you decide, I found out that I don't have to go to college to make some cash, take a couple classes, I'm going to be a plumber. And why am I going to be a plumber? Because people apparently pay a lot of money for plumbers in England, and London is one of the most expensive places in all of Europe. And so you do well if you're a plumber in London because people will pay you well. Fantastic. They pay you using the currency, the British pound, and you've been able to provide for your family by a really nice place. You travel during the summer. You have a boat and an RV and all the goodies that people would love to have. And then something happens. One day, your country, the United Kingdom, decides that it's better off joining the European Union. And it's better off joining the EU because that way there's no more taxes on goods, no more tariffs, no more quotas. We can just trade with each other, no restrictions. And that means that Europe will be my number one buyer of stuff. Fantastic. All right, so the plumber is not really paying attention to the news, and eventually starts to wonder why business is down. His clients not calling, things are happening, and not sure what's going on. Well, they discover that in Poland, someone had a decision to make. Poland also joined the EU. And a plumber in Poland realizes very quickly that they can stay in Poland and survive on very low wage when they fix plumbing, or they can take the entire family and move to London. They don't even need a green card because we're both part of the EU. I can work wherever I want as long as I get the job. I'm good. Go to Poland and then use my skill to make way more money. Am I going to charge as much as the British plumber? I'm not stupid. No. I might even charge half of that because I need to get in the game and I get a bunch of other Polish guys coming behind me. Well, the example I gave you is a political example that was used in England as an argument against this whole exercise. A lot of blue-collar workers were afraid, and rightly so, that they were going to get competition coming in from the Eastern Bloc European countries where labor was going to be much cheaper. And it did happen. It materialized. Now, if you want to back away from this argument for a second and look at it from a more macro perspective, and the question becomes like, who do you want to help? You want to help the plumbers? Okay, good. Hey, we don't want you guys over here. No plumbers. By the way, it's going to be a very long list of people you're going to have to keep out. But the question is, who benefits from that? Who gets hurt? Well, the plumber gets hurt, for sure. But what about the struggling family? The struggling family that has a plumbing issue that it cannot afford now fixes the issue and has a greater disposable income. Multiply that by anything else where the wages have gone down, right? And so that's where this thing comes in. It's good on one side, people will benefit from the cheaper product, but it sucks for you if you happen to be in the industry where all of a sudden the wages went down. All right, that was a very lengthy explanation, but I hope it sticks. It exploits worker in poor countries. And this is where, American companies sometimes have had a bad rap where they've gone to a third world country or less developed countries and they've built factories, and instead of exporting with them American labor standards, OSHA, safety, pollution, they cut corners like crazy because now it's the Wild West and nobody cares. So there is this idea of exploitation of workers, which is very real. Too much power to M&Es. This is awesome. Wait until I explain that one to you. So again, remember what M&E stand for, multinational enterprises. Let's hold that thought for a second, and I'll circle back in just a second. Destroys the environment. I kind of touched on that when I talk about exploitation. if I'm a factory that operates in, I don't know, the West, Arizona, even in New Mexico, they have different environmental policies than California. We have the most stringent. And if you're not sure why, look at the weather on your phone. Let's see if it's already doing it on mine. Whenever I look at the weather here in Claremont, hey, today's good. It's only 100 degrees, mostly sunny. But yesterday it said that the air quality was hazardous in here. So give it another hour. But even though we have horrible pollution, it could be worse. Why am I telling you this? A lot of factories that will go to other countries realize I can save tons of money by not having these filters and just dumping stuff in the ground maybe, and there you go. So it's worse than destroying the environment. It's sometimes the pollution going through into these water tables and local people drinking the stuff and getting sick or worse. Undermines national sovereignty. I talked about that earlier. I always think about sovereignty as the extreme example of sovereignty. The most hardcore example of sovereignty I gave you earlier is North Korea. It is the most sovereign nation on the planet. Now, let's talk about what could be bad about giving away too much stuff. We'll talk in this class about Greece. You've heard about Greece, I'm sure. Major economic catastrophe. It's been bad. It's been ugly for Greece for lots of different reasons we'll talk about later on. One of the things that makes it very hard for Greece is something that might be hard for us to fathom because of how we do things here. So let's use current example. If you know anyone right now who's in the process of refinancing their house or buying a house, they will tell you that the interest rates are rock bottom, right? All right, jobs are bad, unemployment is super high, we're worried about the economy, there's a lot of people who've permanently lost jobs with this pandemic. What gives? Why is the prime rate rock bottom? Well, this is how we as a nation try to kind of goose the economy by having people kind of wake up all of a sudden and go, oh my God, the rates are so low. I have to refinance. I have to buy a house. And it stimulates the economy. So who makes that decision? Who decides to drop the prime? In this case, it's going to be a guy by the name of Jerome Powell, who's the chair of the Federal Reserves, right? And he drops the prime just for that reason. So what does that mean? Well, we go out there and spend, and hopefully it's going to help the economy. Now, why am I talking about that when we talk about sovereignty? Because one of the tenets of sovereignty is having control over your currency, your central bank, your laws, right? Now, let's go back to Greece. Greece does not use its own currency. Greece has joined the European Union and something called the Eurozone, where Greece has agreed a while ago, early 2000, to give up its currency, which was pretty bad, by the way, and adopt the euro. And that way, when it trades with other European unions, they all use the same currency. It makes trade awesome. Problem. Right now, the Greek economy is in the toilet, and it was even before the pandemic. Wouldn't it be great if Greece could do what we're doing with our prime and just dump the prime? It can't, because it does not control its currency, and it doesn't even have its own central bank, right? The European Central Bank, which is located in Germany, I believe Schäuble is the guy who runs it still, and he basically decides what the prime is going to be for all of Europe, right? Through the European Central Bank, the ECB. That's an example of globalization in this case, with Greece having lost some national sovereignty. All right, views on globalization. Opponents. So there's three views, right? And the first view we're going to look at are people who are against globalization. And they see globalization as a new force sweeping through the world in recent time. They think it's the result of technological innovation and Western ideology, and their focus is on exploitation and domination through multinational enterprises. By the way, there's some truth to that stuff. There's some points we'll talk about later, like what Walmart did in Mexico, Oh my God, you just wait until you see this stuff. And so let's talk about that. The first way I want to talk about the domination of multinationals in terms of the exploitation, etc., is by comparing two things here. On one end, I'm going to give you the list of ranked countries by the World Bank by their economy. So we're going to look at the 200 countries, and we're just interested at the top, right? The top, 15, and we're going to see how many of them are in the trillions of dollars, right? So let's start with that first. Let's go there. And eventually it works. There we go. And so here we go. All right, so eventually, by the way, I really have fast Wi-Fi, I swear to you. This is the global GDP. Holy smokes, right? So the global economy is at $87 trillion. Wow. And then what I can do here is see who's on top. 2019, USA, $21 trillion, right? China number 2, look at that. I mean, 14 and 21. We're still way up there, right? And then Japan number 3, teeny tiny Japan. It is mind-boggling. Japan is amazing. It's had its moments, but it's really been doing very interesting. Germany's number 4, India, UK, France, Italy, Brazil. Here's what I want to show you here. The last country to be a $1 trillion country is Indonesia at $1.1 trillion, right? And the rest of all of the other 200 countries are not $1 trillion economies. Can you imagine the Netherlands are like, God, still nothing, you know? And so Mexico, of course, $1 trillion economy. Spain, Canada, $1 trillion economy. You get the idea, right? Now that we've done that, if I want to show you some numbers. If you look at Italy, that's a $2 trillion economy right there, right? Italy. And Italy is going to be ranked, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Number 8 economy in the world is Italy. And then let's scroll down a little bit more. And let's see here. Korea, right? So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Korea is the 12th economic power of the world. So just remember that for a second. And let's go back to our slide and see why I did that. When I start to compare for you MNEs and countries, something really interesting happens. So I'm going to click on that little apple over here for Apple. And what you're going to see is the market capitalization rate of Apple today. Today being August 21st, 2020. Today, so one share of Apple is about $500. But today, the market cap of Apple is $2.1 trillion. I can't wrap my head around this, people. I've been teaching for 25 years. Let me tell you something. About 2 years ago, Apple and Microsoft broke records. 2 years ago. They were the first company worth $1 billion. Fast forward 2 years, Apple doubled that. $2 trillion, right? And if I look at Microsoft neck and neck, just behind Apple here in terms of market cap valuation at 1.6 trillion. Same thing. 2 years ago, it just was at 1 trillion. I can't believe I said just 1 trillion. And so what am I telling you? That when you look at Microsoft and Apple and Microsoft market cap, Apple's value is equal to the 8th economy of the world. Apple is right behind France at 7. When is Apple going to move up? I mean, it looks maybe before the end of the year, it'll be equal to the French economy and then the German economy. And then, of course, Microsoft is, I think we said, number 12, South Korea, right? It's just, to me, I don't know. I hope you find it as mind-boggling as I do, because it is truly mind-boggling. Having said that, can you imagine Microsoft wanting to have a deal in some country that's worth $20 billion a year? Who's going to win? Who can hire an unlimited army of lawyers and drain the resources of this country? Who can throw its weight around, right? An MNE. That's the argument of the opponents. It's a very valid argument. Like I said earlier, we didn't even look at Walmart. Walmart's up there. I don't remember yet if it's $1 billion or not market cap, but it's up there. And Walmart definitely, it threw its weight around Mexico, and now it cornered the Mexican market by means of lack of ethics. The number 2 view of globalization, it's been around for a long time, people. It's not new. It's as old as this guy. Long-run historical evolution since the beginning of human history. Roman Emperor Tiberius imposed the world's first import quota of Chinese textile. Fun fact, Captain James T. Kirk, T stands for Tiberius. That's right, people. Anyway, so there you go. Second view. Number 3, pendulum. Pragmatic view. This is kind of what's happening. The thing goes one way, goes the other way. Times change. So what do we have? The upside. Globalization rapidly accelerated as emerging economies inspired by the 4 tigers joined the world economy. I know I'm throwing a lot at you people, but damn it, it's global. And it's the first chapter. I hope you're able to pause, write stuff down. I hope you are writing it down because I'll be using similar terms. And right now we're just learning. And so you'll hear these terms again. So let's talk about the 4 tigers. I don't believe your author really went into too much detail about them in the first chapter. So let me explain. 4 tigers. So remember earlier we talked about the pigs, right? I'm sorry, not the pigs. We talked about the BRICS. We'll talk about the pigs later, by the way. The BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. The BRICS. We like those little acronyms or little groups of things. 4 tigers, kind of an interesting thing. The 4 tigers, Southeast Asia, 4 fastest growing economies, like crazy growing. South Korea, we just talked about South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore. Singapore is crazy. Stuff I'll be telling you about Singapore is just going to really blow your mind in terms of growth in that country. The pragmatic economic approach to globalization turned it into a teeny tiny little dot, just a pinhead in the middle of nowhere, into one of the most hot areas on the planet in terms of the economy. Okay, pendulum swings the other way now. Boom, down. So everybody was all growth, globalization, rock and roll, awesome. There's money going everywhere to, oh no, 1990, 2000, recessions are going on. There's backslash, people losing jobs. What happens is that when people are upset, they have to blame somebody, and they kind of clam up a little bit. So number 1, they blame like a bunch of foreigners importing their stuff. And number 2, we got to make our own stuff. We got to be independent. It's working out really, really well for North Korea, I hear. So an accurate historical view that globalization is new. It is not new. Look at history. Earlier I was talking about Ethiopia and how the Nile originates in Ethiopia. Well, there's 2 sources, but one of them. And then dumps into Egypt, right? And if you want to look at a little bit of history, just follow the Nile. Follow trade, the trade route between the Horn of Africa, right? We're talking about Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti. The Horn of Africa, and that trade going all the way to Egypt and then into Europe. Yes, we had the Silk Road too. This is the African way. And people have been bartering over there and trading for millennia. It's not new. There's a fear of loss of jobs in developed economies. British plumber people versus other plumber guy, remember? So, and by the way, those are real fears. It sucks. And especially if you're young and if you think like, I'm willing to do the work and I want to go to college, good for you. You need to. But it sucks if you're thinking I was going to retire in 5 or 10 years and now your industry's gone to, overseas and you got to reinvent yourself. It is possible. I've had students do it. But it is rough for lots of reasons, a big emotional blow. Complaints allege that MNEs are destroying local companies. They destroy the culture and the values in emerging economies. I know we touched on that earlier. Moving along with the pendulum still going on that side, what do we have? So we had the Great Recession, which happened not that long ago, about 10 years ago. I remember at Chaffey College, people, it was standing room only. I remember having to beg people to leave the classroom on the first day of class because nobody could get jobs, and they thought the only way I can even get an interview is by having a degree. I got to go back to school and get my degree ASAP. And I remember my colleagues and I being just absolutely shocked. First day of class, all seats were taken. People were trying to sit on the ground between the aisle, and you couldn't even see the wall because people were lined up against the wall. And when I would say, I'm not adding anybody, please leave, nobody would leave. And so I remember those days. People, you've heard this, let me tell you now. Once you have your education, nobody can take it away from you. Once you have that degree, nobody can take it away from you. When the economy starts to just completely blow up and things go bad, here's what happens. Employers all of a sudden go from having to deal with 20 applicants when there's a job opening to 2,000. Not an exaggeration at all, by the way. And so the way they decide, like, oh, I got to manage this, is all of a sudden, what do? What they do is they add a degree where they didn't even have a degree before. And since the recession, some of them kept the degree, some got rid of it. But if you don't have a degree, you're really putting yourself at risk. So recession, Brexit, I talked about Brexit earlier. It's Great Britain leaving the European Union. If you want to see what that's going to do to the British economy, you can watch it live. It's ugly, really ugly right now. Great Britain's number one industry or export in continental Europe is banking. Now, if you're a German bank, a French bank, a Spanish bank, or Italian bank, you have a choice. But you might say, like, wait, hold on a second. These jerks left the European Union. Why do we still have a British bank here in Munich? Get rid of them. And so that's a big risk, because all of these other people are making concessions to be part of the EU, and they don't want to play with a country that's refusing to be part. You want the winnings, but you don't want the risk. See ya. Trump, I mean, I'm not getting political here, people, but these are just the cold facts that it's been one tariff after another. It's been since the election, and there were, promises of tariffs, so that's one thing. But since the election, it is tariff on China, tariff on Mexico, tariff on Canada, tariff on European Union. It's tariffs galore. And if you want to really put a big monkey wrench in the whole world trade thing, tariffs. A tariff is a tax, right? Just remember that. Tax, tax, tax. We'll have a whole chapter on that. There's a whole thing I do on the unintended consequence of a tariff. Even if the tariff sounds like a great intention, I really want to do this thing. A lot of times it's just a political move, by the way. But even if it is, there's like a bazillion unintended consequences that make things just so much worse. So we'll talk about that. And then at the same time that we have this whole thing, we have this China winning thing where as we, the United States, are cutting ties with countries by creating tariffs and moving away from deals that we had, China is knocking on the door going like, I'm here, I'll do business with you, happy to help. So that's happening right now. It's happening now. Whether you like it or not, or you're for or against, it doesn't matter. It is happening. Risk management, identification and assessment of risk. So if you're a multinational corporation and you see all this stuff happening and you're an American company, what do you do? What can you do, right? So you prepare, you try to minimize the impact of high risk, you move things around, even temporarily. Oh yes, I'll open a factory here for 2 years or 4, and you try to plan for anything you can. Scenario planning, a technique to prepare and plan for multiple scenarios. Obviously, very few people could have planned for a pandemic. If you want to see something really interesting, TED Talk, Bill Gates, pandemic. He talked about, if there's ever anything that would stop world trade, or anything for that matter. It wouldn't be a war, it would be a little bug, a little virus. And I think that presentation was 4 years ago. Let's see, let me show you this resource here, Control Risk. Control Risk is really interesting. It's a company that it contracts out and helps corporations deal with various risks around the world. So you're multinational, which means you have people all over the world. And so they released this thing called a risk map. And the risk map basically is a really cool graphical representation of what's going on around the world in terms of risk. So you have a legend over here at the bottom that tells you if it's green, it's very low, if it's red, it's extreme, and there's a maritime risk as well. And you could see by the legend, what's happening. Sorry, almost forgot to tell you. That's security risk. And then the other one is a political risk. So security risk, just think kidnapping. Usually it's like a big measure. And then over here, political risk in terms of what's going on. So you might have a low security risk, not a lot of kidnappings or whatever, but the political risk is super bad. So if you were thinking about going to Australia, I got really good news. It's not very low, but it's low, right? New Zealand, there you go. But perhaps let's look at other areas over here. Oh no, perhaps not so much just about everywhere. I don't know, this thing's crapping out on me again. Let's try it again. And so, and by the way, imagine you have a bunch of expats, you have employees all over the world. This is something that matters to you very much. Low in the US, we're okay. Look at Mexico, political risk, medium. And parts of Mexico, favorite sports, not soccer. It's called secuestros. Let's see. Again, look at Brazil over here. Woo! Look at Argentina. Fantastic. You might not get kidnapped, but the political risk is high. Argentina is in debt again. It's going to get bailed out by the IMF again. I mean, it's got issues. We'll talk more about that. Okay, fine. So having said that, let's eyeball a couple other ones. There's a cyber one, of course. Now threats come in different shapes and forms. We know that. So cyber threats, what? Russia? I'm shocked. US? I'm shocked. And so you can see what's going on over here. This is next time your kids ask you, Mommy, Daddy, where do hackers come from? Well, Ukraine is pretty red hot, right? There you go. Again, Greenland, you're looking good, Denmark. Let's see. And then Africa, risk map for Africa. There's a maritime risk. Let's look at that one. Pirates, they don't just have a patch and say, yo ho ho. But they actually live right here off the Horn of Africa is where you want to, Somalia, we're talking about that, Strait of Hormuz and all that stuff is where, you want to be careful. So if you were thinking about going on your little yacht, avoid those areas that are yellow, orange, pretty much, stay off the coast of California. You should be good, right? That's it for that. Let's see what else we got. So, I try to keep those under an hour, by the way. It's the first chapter. I'm going a little over. If you need to pause, obviously, I'm sure you would have done that by now. Semi-globalization. What we're doing now is we're going to say, okay, we're not going to just go full-on globalization. We're not just going to be like North Korea. We're going to stay home. We're going to maybe try to see if we can just find a way to do it, even in terms of barriers, because we believe that the barriers to market, yes, they're high, but not high enough for complete insulation among countries. I have at the bottom right, you can probably recognize the logo. It's written in Cyrillic, right, in Russian, Pepsi Cola. You can still go in, you're going to have to adapt, whatever. So if the case in point, and this is again, all the stuff from your book, that you have one multinational enterprise that's marketing 100 products in 100 countries. Well, if total isolation, imagine what that would mean. You have to come up with 100 different products because they want it their way and just their way, and you have to, I don't know that you could make a lot of money that way. By having 100 different products in 100 different markets, it's very, very expensive. If you have total globalization, ideally you would have one product for all countries. That doesn't really pan out. There's very few products you could say are the same everywhere. Case in point would be McDonald's with the Big Mac, right? and how the Big Mac, even though it's still called a Big Mac in lots of countries, India, of course, it's not going to be made out of beef. I believe it's either vegetarian or it's mutton that's used for meat, because, of course, you all know this. Cow is sacred, right, in India. And so you could even do that, right? So semi-globalization adapts to optimize. So I those are my words, by the way, but it's the best way I can explain how that works. You try to adapt the best that you can so that it's not going to obviously be fully differentiated and it's not going to be fully globalized, but whatever works depending on the market. Okay, so this is kind of a recap of what I just did, right? Total isolation. It would be localization as a strategy, 100 products for 100 countries. It's very expensive. It's not really truly doable. And then total globalization is you treat the entire world as one market. That's not going to really happen either. Check this out. This is awesome. So this goes from 2005 to 2015 with 2010 in the middle. So 5 years increment. And we're looking at the top 500 corporations in the world. We call them the Global 500. And in this case, we're looking at them by country of origin. United States in 2005 had the most in the world at 170. 2015, we went from 170 to 134. That's a huge loss. That's a big drop. Same thing with the European Union. 165, they lost even more. 124. Japan went from 70 to 54. Switzerland had an increase, 12 to 15. Canada had a drop, 14 to 11. Australia, 8, no change. Look at China. If you wonder where everything went, China is the name of the game. Do you want to fight it or do you want to be part of it? Again, if I were in your shoes today, here we are, August 2020, middle of a pandemic, and you're taking global business and you're a business major, most likely. If I were in your shoes today, I would not take the same language class that I took in college. My main language that I took in college was Spanish. I love Spanish. In my mind, I like to think I'm fluent, but claro que no. I also studied German. I studied Russian. I have a passion for Spanish. I love it. I wish I were better at it. If I were in your shoes, however, I would be learning Chinese. Lucky you, we teach Mandarin Chinese. It's one of the hottest classes on campus. The professor is spectacular. She is amazing. And for those of you who think, well, that's just crazy, nobody can learn Chinese, you're not going for perfection, number one. You want to have something in your resume that's going to differentiate you. That's what you want. Number two, it's a matter of when your company is going to be hosting somebody from China who's interested, or maybe sending somebody over there, because it's just going to happen. It's part of the deal. And you are going to want to be part of that discussion if you can actually speak a little bit. That's why I would recommend it. Plus, you're young, you can learn stuff. What do you care? India, again, just to show you, look at the BRICS. The BRICS went from 35 to 122. So the two biggest gains were China and, of course, the BRICS. Yes, in this case, I'm sure when they did the math, China is one of the BRICS. So I guess we need to subtract 103 and 20 from there. And we'll see then that we're going from 15 to 22, right? Almost. So it's not a huge jump for the BRICS without China. All right, how the book's organized, our last slide, divided in the following parts. So the structure of it, right now, that's what we're doing. Foundation, right? Chapter 2 to 4, I give you kind of a big, huge table of content of what's to come. I introduced you to some terms that are going to show up throughout the class. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 to 4, foundation. Really broad, kind of a macro stuff. Really interesting. And then we're getting into the tools after that. Chapter 5 through 8, the little, know-how. This is where it gets to be interesting. Do I export? Do I have a joint venture? What currencies? We'll talk about currencies. And then, of course, managing around the world. I'm wrong. That's when we start to have the discussion about how to form the company depending on the product. Am I going to use, for those of you who remember management, am I using a matrix structure? Am I going to just have a complete autonomous division over there as a separate subsidiary? Or am I going to do a greenfield acquisition? Is this going to be a strategic alliance? I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. Don't worry if you don't know what they are. We're going to learn. But it's super interesting. Again, if you haven't figured it out by now, as I do this, I don't want to just throw a bunch of definitions at you and move on to the next chapter. If I want to do that, my name would be David Karp, and I would be teaching business law. You can quote me on that. But instead, what I'm trying to do is I really try to bring the stuff alive. It's so freaking interesting. And so I'm going to try to bring it alive. Unfortunately, we're not face to face, so I just have to ramble on in front of my computer. But I read the chapter about 3 times prepping this little lecture for you. I love it as much as I did when I first studied it when I was a student. This is a great book, really awesome book. Your author has done a great job with this book. And by the way, truth be told, I do interact with him in terms of, we always ask for our opinion, and so review stuff and throw a couple things here and there. But I love this book. I wouldn't want to change it for the world. It is a great book, and you guys, I really hope you read it, not just because you're taking this class and you should, but because, damn it, you should learn the stuff. And that's it for me. All right, you guys, I'll see you chapter 2. Please read chapter 2 before you watch the next presentation. And I'll